when it does get crossed like that and they do think, oh, are you my friend? I like to have that discussion like, okay, what about like our work? What about this relationship made you think that? And like, what are the things that you're noticing that you value? What are the things that you're like, what did I do as a peer that made you feel something, right? Is it that you felt seen by me? You felt heard for the first time? You felt like you were empowered? Then let's like a part of being a peer. So this is a do is like, let's figure that out together. And then let's look for that. Right, in our community. Let's look for that. Let's build that in our friendships. Let's build that in ourselves. Again, back to when I was a brand new peer, I would have loved for someone to have maybe taught me that up front and taught me that that was going to happen, because it is heartbreaking when they're like, oh, shoot, we're not friends. And I totally thought we were.
We hang out every week. Why aren't we friends?
Right? You buy me burritos. Like, what's going on?
I am Alejandro.
I'm Mordecai.
And I'm Chrissy.
And
we're you there.
So last time we were talking about the history of peer support. And I think what's kind of important in that is like understanding what is a peer support. So I think it's important that we kind of define what that is, define peer support, maybe some of the do's, some of the don'ts, because, you know, we've all been there and we want to make sure everybody's set up for success. So
yeah, there's just bumps in the roads.
Yeah. Yes.
I feel like we said that last podcast too about bumps in the road. Right?
My life is bumpy. So.
Just bumpy. Yeah. So peer support, I guess to me, there's a definition of peer support for sure, right? It's like person who is close in age to the person that they're supporting, that they have similar lived experiences, etc. But if I was to define it personally, which later we're going to talk about kind of like individualized and being culturally responsive, peer support to me means 100% like somebody who has kind of overcome things, experiences in life that would be similar to whomever you're going to be providing that peer support to. But an individual who knows what it means to feel empowered or to feel without power. And because you know both sides of that, you know how to kind of walk alongside somebody and support them. So when I think about peer support, that's kind of like what I'm striving to be, or, in my position, I might even hire peer support. So that's kind of like what I look for in peers.
What about you, Alejandro?
For me, a peer support is, I never really agreed with the age thing, mainly because I grew up a very single child. So like the people in my life were mainly adults, and those are the only people that I had to rely on. So it's the people that I trust, with how we talked about trust before. It's that trust that I have within the people that are in my life or outside of my life and need to build that trust in order to provide support. So for me, like I understand what it's like to struggle as a teen. I'm 27, so I'm no longer a teen. I'm getting old. I found gray hairs. It sucks, but
welcome.
I know it's rough out here, but and like a lot of the youth that I worked with thought I was in my 40s, but they thought I was like a cool 40-year-old, which is cool. I'm excited to be a cool 40-year-old, but
it's a huge jump.
It added more gray hairs. It was, I felt it. But it's my age didn't matter to them because they didn't know my age. Who cared? It was the fact that they trusted me enough to come to me for the things that were happening within their life, or the things that they wanted to vent about with their family, their friends, their school, their hobbies. They had that place to go to where it was like, I don't care who you are, or like I care how you are. So right. It's how I show up, and that builds that trust for them. And I think that's what peer support is kind of building that trust with anyone that you can and giving them the opportunity to come to you. Not necessarily that they have to, but no matter your background or who you are able to help anyone.
Facts. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I've heard that even in like the youth that I've worked with, how like the relationship that we had, it was important and significant for them because it was like we could just talk super real with each other. Like it wasn't, there's not all this like clinical language or, all right, so it's, 5 minutes to the end of our session. Anything else you'd like to say? It was like, just that like you're building trust with the person and knowing that like you have been through it. You've, gone through maybe not the exact same thing, because we'll never be able to really do that, but because we're all going to experience things differently, but knowing that you've been through something similar and you can support that person through that challenge. And I think that's, from what I've heard from the youth that I've supported, that was like very significant for them in knowing that they feel less judged.
Right.
Because I have that experience. And also like, just there's just something a bit more like when you're being personable and like real with a person rather than like the kind of dynamic that you might have with a professional or something.
Yeah.
So it's kind of diminishing that, like, again, that power dynamic and welcoming just the human in both aspects,
I love what you just said. And it kind of like segues into our next kind of like topic, which was, is there a wrong way to do peer support? Right. Because I think about how you say, I've had the experience too with like therapists and things where it does get down to that last, and you see them, they're like peeking at their watches like that hour's up. Are there things as peers that could be considered a do or a don't?
Yes.
Yes.
The answer's yes.
Short answer, there is.
Yes.
It's not strength-based. There is a wrong way to do this.
Yeah.
What are some of our do's and our don'ts?
Don't dictate. I'm not your boss. I'm not your parent. I'm not here to tell you what to do, how to do it. If I say jump and you say get out of here, cool. Like, I'll take that. I'm working at the speed of you. I'm not telling you how to live or what to do.
Right. Right.
Yep, that's super real. Something that I notice and that I think is very like easy sometimes for like new peer supports to like step into, because we like care about people so much, is that they want to say, oh, please don't do that. Like, just think about your family. Just think about, like we're trying to like convince people to like not do certain things that they want to do, and to kind of like guilt them or shame them, which is, I know it comes from like great intentions, and also like it's not about what we think they should be thinking about that. It's like, that's a great space to be asking questions and being curious. So instead of casting judgment, ask a lot more questions, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I was brand new and I had like my first couple of youth that I was working with, it was actually like legitimately a challenge. When you start working youth, you want that to be like an awesome, open, talking relationship. I did have to fight myself sometimes if there was like something shared that my own maybe cultural background or my own bias would come in the way, because it's like and then I had to fight that urge to be like, oh no, that's not right, or please don't do that because you're going to hurt yourself. And as a youth, I know that I didn't like that. If somebody was going to just tell me to stop doing something, it kind of made me want to do the opposite of what you've just told me. So I had to check myself, right? To be aware of my own, what's coming up for me and why do I feel the need. So I love that you're saying that curiosity, right? So just be curious with our youth instead of like wanting to say something.
I actually, both of you sparked something in me as well. And it's the fact that good intentions don't always mean good actions.
Oh, yeah.
Facts. Mm-hmm.
My intentions were good, but just because I did the thing doesn't mean that it's great. So I'm going to get very real and break the wall. You're not a superhero. You cannot fix everything. Your job is not to fix. Your job is to support. And we are providing that support. I wish I was Tim the Toolman Taylor for me aging myself again, but I cannot fix everything as much as I want to. However, I can help and be there for the people that need the help. And what that is just opening that space to be like, hey, do you need to vent? Do you want And again, it's those questions. It's a space for
Yes.
questions.
Yes.
And that is what peer support is for me as well. And that's a huge do, is like leave that space for questions and vulnerability, but don't be the one to take the responsibility to fix everyone's things.
Mm-hmm.
Which that kind of actually goes back to, I think, our first episode. Chris, you were talking about the zone of helpfulness, and like
Yes,
that
yeah.
leads us into being like over involved. And the same thing is true, like when, like if we aren't very clear about our own boundaries in the work, because another thing is like we're also not their friend.
Right.
Like we can be friendly, but we're not their friend, because a friend would maybe take on a lot more than what a peer support should. So checking what is actually within our role and what is not. And I've definitely had that. And I'm curious to hear if y'all have experienced this, where youth will say, you know, will call me a friend or like their best friend or something. And then it's like, oh, okay, so we have to talk about that. Just like a little quick reminder, just like, hey, actually, like I'm your peer support. Just got to keep things like professional, you know.
Right.
Yeah, I've dealt through that, and
Yeah.
it broke their heart, quite
know, I
honestly.
hate
And
it.
it was
Right?
heartbreaking for me, because he's like, you know, I want to tell you, you're one of my best friends, and am I one of your friends? And I was like, I don't know how to, like, no matter how we go about this,
Mhm.
maintaining your boundaries is a do.
Yes,
In
it
this
is.
job.
Yes, it
Huge.
is.
And it's not only for like the youth and and how they see you, it's for yourself,
yes.
because that's how we keep from getting over involved.
Mhm.
But it was one of those things where I had to be like, I am your peer support and I see you as a friendly individual,
Right.
but this is as much as we got right here.
Mhm.
And it's like a lot of sadness right now, but let's go get Dairy Queen or something.
Yeah.
That's something we talk about this a lot in our training around like boundaries and stuff. That's like a part of the discussion that I kind of like to have with people, though, when it does get crossed like that and they do think, oh, are you my friend? I like to have that discussion like, okay, what about like our work? What about this relationship made you think that? And like, what are the things that you're noticing that you value? What are the things that you're like, what did I do as a peer that made you feel something, right? Is it that you felt seen by me? You felt heard for the first time? You felt like you were empowered? Then let's, like, a part of being a peer, so this is a do, is like, let's figure that out together. And then let's look for that, right, in our community. Let's look for that. Let's build that in our friendships. Let's build that in ourselves. So that's a big part of peer support too. Cause I'm thinking about, just back to when I was a brand new peer, I would have loved for someone to have maybe taught me that up front and taught me that that was going to happen, because it is heartbreaking when they're like, oh shoot, we're not friends. And I totally thought we were.
We hang out every week. Why aren't we friends?
Right? You buy me burritos. Like, what's going on? Which also reminds me of a huge do, which is being transparent from the beginning.
Ooh.
Right?
Yeah.
Really making sure that we share those big pieces, which is the fact that we are peer support. And some of the things I think we may have talked about a little bit in the first episode around like wanting to make sure folks know how we are mandatory reporters, how, what does confidentiality look like, those kind of things. So I think those are big parts of dues and can set us up for success in the long run.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That calls us back to last episode of like the transparency and consistency over time. equals
Yes.
Trust. right?
Yes.
So if we can be transparent from the get-go, that person then knows what to expect going forward, which is going to save you a lot going forward in your relationship.
Mhm.
That does not mean that it won't come up again, but the reminders will be easy.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like thinking about all this do's and don'ts. Kind of thinking about culturally how peer support fits into it. I kind of shared some of my experience when I first was a peer, how I had to really check those bias, right? And I had to really check what culturally was maybe coming up in the way, or et cetera. So I'm curious. I love how we ask each other questions on this podcast, but I'm curious, how does knowing what are the do's and don'ts of peer support, how do we stay still individualized? We tell people like, we want you to be individualized. We want you to be culturally responsive. What does that look like for y'all?
So one thing I want to say on that topic is like, 'cause as a peer support, like we're not going to just be working with people who have the exact same background as ourselves, who have the exact same like life experiences, which is, actually pretty rare to find in a whole person. So, but what I've like learned from that is really not to like lean on that person to like educate me on like these cultural differences. Like if I learn a little bit about who they are and where they're coming from, it is also my job to learn outside of them to make sure that I'm like really not putting the onus on them to educate me on who they are and things. And when I have like specific questions about maybe details about how they practice or how they live a certain way or what feels right for them, that's, a bit more of like honoring the individualized aspect of it.
Right.
But I also in that too, wanting to like just normalize differences in people and that like it's okay that we're not the same in this way. And I'm also not going to ask you to put a huge load of pressure on your shoulders to teach me about your culture.
Absolutely.
That's not fair.
100%.
I show up to every one-on-one with the same standard. And this is like how I do my intro is if you let me be unapologetically me, I will let you be unapologetically you. And that allows me to see just like layer by layer. It's going to happen over time for sure. They're not going to go right out the gates and be like, yeah, let's talk about everything. But it's kind of like leading by that example is if I'm able to be vulnerable and I got a lot of baggage. So like I have a lot to be vulnerable about that can relate to just because there was a question that was asked and is like, when did you realize that you weren't a kid anymore? I'm still trying to figure that out. I hate bills, but like I'd still want to be a kid. So it's that ability to be just who I want to be with them to allow them to be who they want to be, period. And then living with that curiosity mindset of what do you feel about this? Like it's those questions of like, how does that make you feel? Or like,
Right.
what does this kind of like feel like to you? Or like when you hear this, what happens in your brain? Because this is what happens in my brain. So it's that digging deeper to get that understanding is what I strive for in the work that I do and also remaining culturally responsive of
Right.
that there's so many cultures that I don't know anything about. And I'm a big question guy. So like, I'm going to ask them if it's too many questions. And I even say, if there's too many, like, feel free to stop me. Well, you got ox kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much where those are words. Yeah. That's how I'm living.
I love what both of you said. And I was like writing notes because I was like, I want to make sure I say this. I feel like it's really important. A big do in my book would be like modeling what it looks like to live authentically, right? And a big thing that is also kind of just on my head and heart right now is the realities though of our world, right? So, I'm thinking about just some particular youth and even friends experiences where you don't necessarily feel safe in your environments to live authentically. So as a peer support, honoring that could be someone else's experience, and wanting to really like listen to them and be curious, but also finding that way to empower. Because at the end of the day, like as far as peers, that's what we're kind of like working to provide. Like we're working to provide this place where it's like, you know what, when you come here and you've got this one-on-one, I understand that this world, especially for youth, right? Like I understand that this world has probably put some labels on you and you may not have the safest space, et cetera, whatever it might be. But here in our one-on-one, I am going to show up authentically, like you said, and I'm going to create that space where you can, should you choose. And if you don't, like, that's where I want to work towards and have a place that you could work towards being able to live authentically. I think that's just so important. And I think it's something that if we, as a society, if we encourage that more, that's what's going to build up. We talked last episode about building trust. How are we going to get that back in our society, in our communities, in our work? I really feel like modeling that authenticity is a big, big part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I love what you shared too about how like a part of our work is to empower people, right? And so like I think that is maybe something we haven't driven home enough is just how important it is to be like inspiring and building hope in the people that we are like serving, because hope is what's going to carry them through the really hard
Yes.
stuff. We want to be helping them to build their resilience so that they can like move through that with greater ease. And I was over here, I was like taking notes too, 'cause I'm like, oh my God, all this like good stuff. But Alejandro, you shared something about like in being vulnerable and like real and authentic with them. And it reminded me about strategic sharing.
Yeah.
So
I love that.
would anybody like to maybe share a little bit about that or some like tips for our listeners?
Yeah, I got that.
You're really sounding like your age there.
Yeah.
I got that one.
I got that. Don't worry. So it is sharing a life experience, but not making it about you, right? So if I have an adverse experience or something that I have gone through or an experience that was challenging for me, and Chrissy, you're asking me like, oh man, I'm going through this thing. I'm not going to be like, oh, you know what? I went through this thing too. Let me tell you A, B, and C about it. And it will like, oh my gosh, no. It's going to be like, oh yeah, I had something similar about it. Like, how are you feeling about it? Right. Mm-hmm. And the strategic sharing in that was just simply saying, it's opening the door to like, I went through something similar so that I can have that level with you or start to get that level.
Right.
And then if you choose to ask me questions about how I chose to go through that, then I will provide that answer in a way that is still not giving you everything, but just the important stuff. I'm not giving every fine detail about every experience that I had.
No trauma dumping.
Yeah, I'm not. You're not my therapist,
right?
I'm here to just tell you a story, and I'm a very good. I'm a storyteller, so I will tell a story, and I will make it as funny as possible for the sad situation that I was in.
Right.
But or not even as funny as possible, just as lighthearted as I can to make sure that it is going to be okay.
Right. And inspire that hope, like Mordecai was saying, because, you know, strategic sharing and listening, right? It's like when I practice peer support, it's important to me to get consent, you know, because telling your story is a huge piece of it, you know, and that's the whole point of sharing that lived experience. But like you said, when somebody, you know, just starts, oh yeah, I went through that same thing, and here's how it happened for me. You're like, okay, thanks for listening, I guess. Right. So I love that you brought that up around that, because that's a huge lesson. I feel like I had to learn when I became a peer was like, it's definitely not about me. This isn't about, it's not the Chrissy show. It's about listening to the person and their experience. And if I find it necessary to share, then I'm going to get that consent. Hey, would you mind if I express, you know, something I went through similarly?
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Honestly, like consent language in like all relationships is just a really beautiful like practice to get into.
Yes.
Like, hey, is it okay if I share this thing with you?
Yeah.
You know, it's respect right there.
And I also feel like, you know, again, calling back to our episodes, we talked about like the stigma and all those things. Mm-hmm. When we do that shared experience or that understanding, it's like it removes that stigma, which is something that we were talking about that we know we need to do. We want to remove that. And so destigmatization is a part of it.
And normalizing
the
like broad range of experiences that we can be having.
Normalize that life sucks sometimes. It is not great. Sometimes you just go through the ringer and like, it's okay. We all have those experiences and it could be as heightened or as downplayed as you want it to be. Yep. But knowing that you can be that person who's just like, okay, I'm not going to make it about me. If someone comes to help, if I'm going through my things, I'll put that aside. Right. I'll deal with that when I need to deal with it. Right now, I need to put myself in this position to where I can help you.
Oh, you mean level 2 listening?
That's crazy.
All back. I think that's why, like, culturally, we like memes. Because I feel like memes, it's like everybody, we all understand.
Dude, you just changed my whole life at looking at memes.
It's right. It's shared understanding. It's literally like, yep.
Facts.
Right? That's like it. You're like, heart, because it's like, I feel this. I feel that.
Okay. That also like makes me think of what we were talking about earlier with being like culturally responsive, which is also like, okay, what is youth culture? And like, how can we be responsive to that? And part of that is memes. Right. Part of that is like
music.
Yeah.
TikTok.
Yes, aesthetics.
Yep.
All
aesthetics.
Socials.
Aesthetics. Yep.
I'm still learning aesthetics.
Whatever. You got the dopest hoodie on right now. I don't know
And the
if
hat.
folks get in the hat. Oof. Like, come on.
Black hoodie. That's all you need.
So I would love if we could kind of like segue into those who maybe like aren't already in this position. Like how would they even go about like finding this job? Because maybe this sounds like right up their alley, that they have the lived experience. They want to be doing better for their community. Now what?
I really want to take this initially because this is something I'm passionate about again, which I do think, so currently the way that it's functioning is peer support is part of like the mental health realm, right? And so the mental health realm, like we talked about last episode, is still kind of in the systemic challenging place. And so a lot of like the titles and things, like for example, youth peer support specialist, or you might see something like wraparound youth partner. If you're not necessarily in touch already with that kind of language, how would you find it? So I'm actually really passionate about getting this kind of stuff out, but what would it take? Like what kind of language would we need to put out there, especially being responsive to youth culture, where folks could know these type of positions exist? I'm thinking about my own experience when I first was told about Youth Era, and like it was my friend, and he was like, "Hey, you should come over here and work." I didn't know any of this. I didn't know there was peer support. I didn't know that there was like a system of care, that there was wraparound. I didn't know any of that. And I would have been a prime candidate of someone who would need a peer. So I think that's a very important thing to call out and talk about.
I love that. Like even to think about like, what are the barriers that for a person to receive that kind of care or even know about that kind of care,
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally relate to that.
So I think as far as like, how would people find it, that's a really important, I guess, like you kind of have to have that heart that you're already wanting to look to support people. And so searching for jobs, and hopefully like the websites would bring up like peer support, right? Because you might not think to even use the word peer. You're just thinking like, I know I want to be somebody who's walking alongside. I know I want to I've been through a lot of things and I want to help others, but how do I do it? And I've actually had friends say that to me. Like, I know I want to help people. I just don't even know, like, what's the avenue do I go? Do I have to go through all this school and become a therapist? Do I have to become the licensed clinical social worker? And it's like, actually, there's routes and pathways.
Yeah, which that I love too about this work is that you don't have to go through like a master's program to be able to do the work that we do.
Yeah.
That it's your resume is your lived experience, more or less.
Yeah.
That reminds me real quick. This lady, I'll never feel more seen. So I don't have any degrees at this time. And I remember I was doing this speaking thing and I had like imposter syndrome really bad. I was thinking like, I'm not qualified. There's all these other people here who are like literal doctors and stuff. And I had this speaking thing and I was telling her, she was sitting next to me and I was telling her, I was like, I just don't feel like I'm qualified to be here. And she goes, honey, you got a PhD. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, a past history degree. Like you have your own history and like you can speak to that like no one else can. And I just felt like, hell yeah, dude. And then I got up there and I was like, yeah, you're right. Like I know mine and that's good enough. So that's like what's awesome about peer support, because it's like, you know you, and that's good enough.
That's the tweet.
Yeah, we'll have tweets, we'll have hashtags, we'll have all the things.
I actually had no idea this job existed either. I was looking for a job in juvenile services for the detention. I wanted to work in the diversion unit so that youth who were getting released from jail, that they wouldn't like, once they work with me, it gets wiped off their record kind of thing.
Oh, I love that.
But nothing was available. And then when I typed in youth services, this was the job that came up. And I was like, oh, I had no idea this was even a thing. So I started going, like I deep dived into peer support.
Wow.
And it was like a whole world. And I do want all y'all to know that like, whether it's paid or not, anyone can be a peer support.
X, yeah.
It is not something that you have to be paid for. It's not a title. It is, if you are there and you are listening with intent to provide that support and be those open ears, that is peer support at its finest.
Totally.
Way to say that. Very well said. Love that.
So some suggestions off the top of my head is like for people that are wanting to maybe find this job, look at local nonprofits.
Thanks,
Yeah.
A lot
Great
of
tip.
nonprofits have some funding generally for a peer support, whether that's a bit more specialized based on the person's culture, or if it's like ours, we're youth peer support specialists. So that's, 14 to 25 in our organization. But other orgs might be a bit different in that they might work with much younger folks.
Truth. Or even older too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very true. Yeah.
All right. So just to kind of give us a summary of what we've covered today, I mean, it's been awesome. We've definitely kind of talked about how we define peer support. And I love that we each gave our own view and perspective on that because it's individualized, right? And so for our listeners who are at home or wherever you are, remember that you are individualistic and that is what will make your peer support just exactly what it needs to be. So take that with you. We did discuss some of the don'ts, the do's and the don'ts, because there can be a little bit of a wrong way. So you want to make sure you're focusing on the productive way. And we do have some tips for that we're going to throw in our Discord. I'll mention in a bit. And we talked about culturally responsive and individualized peer support. What does it look like for us? And of course, we wanted to give you guys some tips on how to find work like this and where is it at? What is peer support? How do I find it? What are some tips? So yeah, that was today's episode and I loved it. I hope y'all loved it.
Yeah. Thank you
for
all.
being here.
And then for just like a little call out, what are some things that y'all do for peer support? Or just like, what is peer support to y'all? Give us those answers.
Yeah.
I like that because I also like seeing other people's perspectives.
Yeah, we love that. And so you can find us and talk to us or chat us or whatever feels good to you on Instagram. So Instagram, it's at the Youth Era. On TikTok, it's at Youth Era. And then now Discord, our beautiful community we're building there. Just search for YE Connect and you'll be connected to us.
You heard it?
I love that.
That's the tagline too. Look at that.
We're getting better and better out here, folks.
Episode 3 is all it took.
Yeah, 3, yeah.
And with that, I think we close it out. So thank y'all for listening and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.